a single bridge quietly lost its crown. For decades, the Ambassador Bridge between Detroit and Windsor was the undisputed king of North American trade, the busiest international commercial crossing on the continent. That era is over. In 2025, the Blue Water Bridge recorded approximately 2.1 million commercial truck crossings. The Ambassador Bridge, roughly 1.9 million. And the gap is accelerating. In just the first 3 months of 2026, Blue Water logged 531,132 commercial truck trips against Ambassador's 496,796. The Federal Bridge Corporation Limited has confirmed it directly. Blue Water has formally surpassed every other international crossing in commercial traffic volume. No structural failure, no natural disaster, no headline. The busiest trade artery in North America was dethroned in silence, and most people never noticed. The force that quietly rerouted 2 million trucks a year has nothing to do with engineering. It's a financial ledger, cold, mathematical, and far more consequential than the bridges themselves. $27 per axle. That's what the Ambassador Bridge charges a commercial vehicle to cross. One axle. 27 Canadian dollars. Now compare that to the Blue Water Bridge. Approximately $7 per axle. Same country, same border, same cargo, heading to the same factories. For a standard 5-axle semi-truck, according to reporting from Town and Country Today, confirmed in April 2026, that enforces a brutal $100 US penalty per crossing. Not per week, per trip. Let that number settle in your operational mind. $100 every single time a truck rolls across the Ambassador instead of the Blue Water. And these trucks don't cross once a month. A mid-size fleet running the Windsor-Detroit corridor might push 40-50 rigs per day across that border. Multiply $100 by 50 crossings. $5,000 daily, evaporating into a single toll booth's revenue stream. Over a year, you're staring at north of $1.2 million in toll premiums alone. One fleet, one routing decision. In an industry where net margins hover between 2 and 5%, that number ceases to be a line item. It becomes an extinction event. But the toll is only half the ledger. The Ambassador Bridge doesn't just charge more, it punishes you with time. Picture your truck exiting Highway 401. Instead of flowing seamlessly onto an interstate, it crawls through downtown Windsor. Traffic lights, school zones, construction detours stacking unpredictability onto every trip. Then it crosses into Detroit and repeats the ordeal. Dense urban surface streets before finally reaching the interstate grid. Every hour of idle crawl costs fuel, driver wages, and missed delivery windows. Now picture the Blue Water Bridge route. Highway 402 feeds directly into the crossing at Port Huron. On the American side, you're on Interstate 69 and Interstate 94 within minutes. No city grid, no stoplights, no unpredictable urban congestion eating your schedule alive. The route is longer in raw kilometers and shorter in every metric that actually matters on a fleet manager's spreadsheet. Combine $100 toll premium with an hour or more of urban crawl time, and the math becomes merciless. No rational operator voluntarily absorbs that cost when the alternative is a clean highway run at a fraction of the price. Spreadsheets don't have loyalty. They have columns, and the columns pointed to Port Huron. This explains the quiet migration of 2 million trucks. No directive, no policy shift, pure arithmetic. Now zoom out. Because this microeconomic squeeze is operating inside a macroeconomic pressure cooker that makes it exponentially more lethal. Global Affairs Canada and Statistics. Canada confirmed the scale. $3.6 billion Canadian in goods. Crosses this border every single day. And right now, that colossal daily flow is being hammered by forces no individual fleet manager can control. 50% tariffs on metals, steel, aluminas are crushing producers across the entire Great Lakes manufacturing corridor. Meanwhile, unemployment in transit-dependent regions like Windsor and Sarnia hovers between 8 and 10%. The communities that physically depend on cross-border freight are simultaneously losing jobs and watching the margins that sustain remaining businesses collapse inward. In this environment, every avoidable dollar becomes existential. Zero tolerance for legacy monopoly pricing. Zero. Consider what this means for a real operation, a mid-size aluminum parts manufacturer in Windsor. Their product crosses the border multiple times during fabrication. Raw material northbound, semi-finished component southbound, finished assembly back again. Each crossing routed through the ambassador adds that $100 penalty. 3 or 4 border transits per unit, thousands of units monthly. You're hemorrhaging hundreds of thousands annually into a single toll operator's pocket. With 50% metal tariffs already devouring input margins, that toll premium transforms from an inconvenience into a binary outcome. Make payroll in March or file for creditor protection in April, so they reroute. Everyone reroutes. The math permits no alternative. This is the system that has emerged. Quietly, but decisively. Timing, cost, and reliability are no longer optional factors in cross-border freight. They are absolute requirements. The Ambassador Bridges pricing model, built in an era when geographic monopoly guaranteed traffic, regardless of cost, has collided head-on with a reality where every cent is contested, every minute is monetized, and every operator runs survival calculus before sunrise. The physical structure still stands. Its financial logic has already fractured. And what makes this far more complex than a simple story of one bridge losing market share to another, a third player is entering this equation, one backed not by private toll revenue, but by sovereign capital and political architecture that transforms commercial logistics into something else entirely. The Gordie Howe International Bridge, 6 lanes, direct highway-to-highway connection linking 2 nations' busiest trade arteries. And a pricing model that doesn't just undercut the ambassador, it eviscerates the entire cost structure of cross-border freight. Here's what the Windsor-Detroit Bridge Authority published in its toll fact sheet. Commercial traffic priced at $6.90 USD per axle under the breakaway discount program. Ambassador charges roughly $15 per axle. Run the math on a standard 5-axle truck. That's a $40.50 advantage per single crossing. Compound that across a fleet running daily shipments, 52 weeks a year, and the savings cascade into hundreds of thousands annually for a single carrier. Now layer in the streamlined customs plaza design, purpose-built for throughput, shaving up to 20 minutes off each transit compared to the congested municipal routing into Ambassador. You're looking at a bridge that doesn't merely compete. It renders the old model economically indefensible on 2 simultaneous axes, cost and time. This is sovereign infrastructure engineered to one specification, maximum commercial throughput at minimum friction. Canada deployed $6.4 billion to make that sentence a physical reality, straddling the Detroit River. Now, here's where the numbers leave the spreadsheet and enter the arena of raw political leverage. In early 2026, Donald Trump threatened to block the bridge's impending opening. The stated argument, the United States was being taken advantage of. The demand, compensation packages must be addressed before operations commence. The implicit weapon, delay itself, wielded against the single most time-sensitive supply chain on the continent. And the cost of that weapon? According to the Anderson Economic Group, as reported by the Washington Post, any operational delay would hemorrhage up to $7 million USD per week from the auto-integrated supply chain. $7 million in real losses inflicted on factories across both sides of the border. Factories that cannot function without parts crossing that river on a precise hour-by-hour schedule. Every week of politically motivated delay, $7 million evaporates. From American workers, from Canadian suppliers, from the shared manufacturing base that neither country can unilaterally replace. So pause here. Strip away the political theater entirely. The reality of this leverage isn't found in press conferences or social media posturing. It's buried deep in a rigid $6.4 billion pre-funded contract executed precisely to neutralize this exact kind of noise. If you miss this mathematical firewall, you fundamentally misunderstand Canada's structural position in this confrontation. Here's what the 2012 crossing agreement actually stipulates. And this transforms the entire narrative from political vulnerability into sovereign checkmate. Canada financed the complete project, every dollar of construction, $6.4 billion in sovereign capital deployed upfront with no requirement. None for initial American investment. The United States contributed $0 to the build. Michigan, however, secures joint ownership and 50% of net toll revenues. But that mechanism activates only after Canada has recovered its full initial investment. Absorb that structure. Canada built it. Canada owns it operationally until cost recovery is complete. The American revenue sharing benefit begins only once Canadian taxpayers are made whole. This is strategic architecture, purchasing immunity from future political extortion by eliminating the negotiating surface entirely. There is nothing left to hold hostage when the money is already spent and the legal framework already sealed, which is precisely why the political narrative collapsed under its own factual weight. Former Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, a Republican, and I want you to register that detail carefully, went on the record in the Detroit News in February 2026 to publicly dismantle the rhetoric coming from his own party's president. His correction was surgical. The 2012 agreement confirms Canada financed everything. Michigan receives ownership and future revenue sharing at zero upfront cost to American taxpayers. The claim that America was being exploited is the mathematical inverse of reality. A Republican governor publicly contradicting his own president, on the record, on contractual grounds, because treaty arithmetic does not bend to electoral convenience. The numbers are the numbers, and someone had to say it. This is the deeper architectural brilliance of what Canada executed 14 years before the threat ever materialized. In 2012, when this agreement was signed, nobody was framing infrastructure openings as geopolitical hostage scenarios. But the deal was structured so airtight that any future interference would crash against pre-committed capital and ratified legal framework. No remaining surface for leverage, no gap to exploit. The firewall was poured in concrete and cash a full decade before the threat was even conceived. Blocking that kind of efficiency doesn't protect economic interests, it restricts them. That single sentence ends the debate. So here's a question worth sitting with. And I genuinely want your thinking on this. When bridge openings get held hostage for electoral leverage, when $7 million bleeds from the supply chain every single week of politically motivated delay, what remains that cannot be weaponized in our deeply integrated North American economy? Drop your read on this trajectory in the comments. But before you settle on an answer, consider what this structural shift actually means when you step back from the confrontation itself. Because the instinct is to see the death of Ambassador's monopoly as a loss, a dispersal of control, a weakening of Canada's position. That instinct is dead wrong. What's actually emerging from this corridor is a property the system has never possessed before, and understanding precisely what it is will fundamentally reshape how you assess Canada's true strategic position in this entire game. That property is antifragility. The system doesn't just survive disruption, it gets stronger because of it. Here's the conventional reading of everything we've discussed so far. Ambassador Bridge loses its dominance, traffic scatters, Canada's grip on its most critical trade corridor loosens. Sounds like erosion, feels like vulnerability. That reading is completely structurally backwards. To understand why, you need to confront what the old system actually looked like. Not the nostalgic version, the real one. For decades, North America's most integrated supply chain ran through a single privately owned choke point. One bridge, one owner, one bottleneck, funneling over $400 million in daily bilateral trade into the entire just-in-time manufacturing ecosystem stretching from Ontario to Michigan. Picture a city of 2 million people served by exactly one blood bank. Every hospital, every emergency room, every surgical suite drawing from one single reservoir. The moment that reservoir gets contaminated or blocked, there is no plan B. People die. That was Ambassador Bridge's structural position in continental logistics, a single point of failure masquerading as strategic importance. And in February 2022, the system got its stress test. When protesters blockaded the Ambassador Bridge, the collapse was immediate. According to Transport Canada's economic impact analysis, approximately $400 million USD in daily trade froze overnight. The auto industry alone hemorrhaged over $300 million in direct losses within a single week. Production lines in Michigan went dark. Parts that were supposed to cross in hours sat in queues for days. The just-in-time architecture, the very system that makes North American manufacturing globally competitive, revealed its most catastrophic design flaw. It had been running on a single artery with zero surgical backup. That's the nightmare baseline. That's what monopoly actually looked like the moment it was tested. Now here's where the data performs a reversal that should permanently rewire how you assess this corridor. During that identical crisis week while ambassadors sat frozen, truck volumes at alternative Ontario crossings surged by 72%. That figure comes from the Bridge and Tunnel Operators Association, corroborated by CBC News reporting. And the crossing that absorbed the lion's share of that emergency rerouting? Blue Water Bridge. The same crossing that had been quietly capturing market share for years through pure cost logic was now functioning as the corridor's immune response in real time. Freight didn't vanish. It didn't wait for government intervention. The market, without a single emergency directive, without legislation, without taxpayer bailouts, rerouted itself. Sit with that number. 72%. A 72% volume surge across alternative crossings during the worst trade disruption in modern Canadian history. That's not a contingency plan drafted in some policy office. That's a decentralized logistics network doing exactly what decentralized systems do under pressure, adapting, absorbing, redistributing load. The very phenomenon that looks like Ambassador losing its grip is actually the corridor developing an immune system it never had. And this was no temporary crisis spike. The structural data confirms it. Traffic reports from the Bridge and Tunnel Operators Association through 2025 and into Q1 2026 show Blue Water Bridge handling 280,000 trucks versus Ambassador's 287,000. The shift is permanent. The redundancy is baked in, built entirely by market logic, shippers choosing faster routes, lower tolls, fewer bottlenecks, without a single dollar of public subsidy engineering the outcome. So here is the reframe, and this is the insight that changes the entire calculus. Canada didn't lose a monopoly. Canada shed a vulnerability. The concentration of trade through one privately controlled crossing was a liability whose price tag became visible in February 2022. $400 million a day in exposed trade, $300 million in auto losses within 1 week, and an entire continent's manufacturing rhythm held hostage by a single bridge deck. What exists now is fundamentally more valuable. A corridor with distributed load capacity, market-tested redundancy, the proven ability to absorb a black swan event without systemic collapse. The silent dethroning of Ambassador Bridge tells a story most people misread. Look past the headline and you see a trade corridor that stress-tested itself and passed. The instinct to mourn the old monopoly is the instinct to confuse concentration with control. In modern logistics, in modern geopolitics, concentration is the opposite of control. It's exposure. What Canada now possesses, quietly, without fanfare, engineered by nothing more rational than shippers chasing efficiency, is genuine structural resilience. The corridor didn't weaken, it immunized itself. And that market-built immunity is about to be reinforced by something the free market alone could never have constructed. a $6 billion bridge financed entirely by the Canadian government. Gordie Howe International Bridge opens its lanes into a corridor that just proved it can redistribute stress autonomously. Call it what it is, a sovereign chess move inserted directly into the free market's operating logic. And the impact is already measurable before full operations even begin. The moment Gordie Howe published its toll structure, $4.35 to $8.75 USD, the private monopoly that controlled this crossing for 90 years flinched. The Moran family, operators of Ambassador Bridge, slashed select passenger tolls by nearly 50% in April 2026. Source: Detroit News, click on Detroit. 90 years of unchallenged pricing power, cracked open by a competitor that hasn't even reached full capacity. Capitulation, driven purely by gravitational economics. Now project this forward 5 to 10 years. 3 major bridge corridors, Ambassador, Blue Water, Gordie Howe, operating in aggressive parallel. What unfolds? Toll price wars, redundancy deepening into resilience. And according to Windsor Detroit Bridge Authority Integrated Economic Impact Studies, this tri-bridge super corridor is forecast to handle up to 25% of all U.S.-Canada trade, 1/4 of the entire binational commercial flow, concentrated through a hyper-competitive logistics cluster that systematically reduces marginal costs at every node. The downstream architecture becomes self-reinforcing. Warehousing, customs clearance, last mile distribution, all compressed in cost because the corridor itself competes for volume. A transportation distribution logistics ecosystem emerges where manufacturers on both sides gain structural advantage simply by proximity. The cheaper it gets, the more volume it attracts. The more volume it attracts, the cheaper it gets. Network effects. Exponential, compounding, and irreversible once critical mass is achieved. Here's the elevation most analysts miss entirely. Canada didn't merely build a bridge. Canada reset the pricing floor for an entire continental trade artery. When publicly financed infrastructure enters a market built on private extraction, the terms themselves shift permanently. The private operator either matches the new economic reality or watches traffic migrate. There is no third option. Canada has graduated from toll taker to architect, the entity that writes the rules by which every other player must operate. So here's what everything we've mapped today distills to. True sovereign leverage in a deeply integrated economy rests on a single foundation. Physical infrastructure so efficient, so redundant, and so aggressively priced that your trade partners cannot economically justify rooting around you. Tariff threats fade. Political theater exhausts itself. Economic gravity, quiet, structural, decisive, remains. And that is the only force that makes a nation's position genuinely unbreakable. If this caliber of analysis beneath the headlines, where real strategic shifts actually occur, is what you've been searching for, subscribe. This channel maps the moves that reshape Canada's sovereign position before they become conventional wisdom.